Gerald was feeling good when he walked back into that same office 6 months later. His heart numbers had moved. He'd earned that smile from his doctor, and he knew it, so he wasn't ready for what came next. "Your heart's doing great," his doctor said. Then paused. "But I want to talk about something else I've been watching." Gerald's fasting glucose had been creeping up for 2 years. Not enough to flag as diabetes, just enough to sit in that gray zone doctors call prediabetes, the zone almost nobody feels and almost everybody ignores because there's no dramatic symptom attached to it. Just a slow fog after lunch, a waistband that got tighter without the scale really changing. An energy crash most people blame on just getting older. Gerald had noticed all three. He'd just never connected them to anything. He'd chalked up the afternoon fog to a bad night's sleep. He'd chalked up the waistband to that's just what happens after 60. Nobody had ever told him these three small things might be the same thing. Wearing different disguises. That's exactly the phrase his doctor used. In fact, different disguises. Same root cause. Here's what I want you to know before we go any further, because this is where a lot of people over 60 get quietly discouraged. Rising blood sugar with age is common, but it is not automatic and it is not a one-way street. What's actually happening is specific, mechanical, and this is the important part, remarkably responsive to a handful of targeted changes. Not a diet overhaul, not medication necessarily, specific changes. Today we're covering exactly what's driving it after 60, the 4 things quietly pushing it upward, and the 4 that bring it back down with real numbers from real research, not guesswork. This is the conversation Gerald had almost word for word, once his doctor slowed down enough to walk him through it. So let's start with the mechanism, because once you see it, the rest of today makes complete sense. Picture your muscles as sponges. Every time you eat carbohydrates, glucose enters your bloodstream, and your muscles are supposed to soak a large share of it up, out of your blood and into storage, where it's harmless. That's their job, and for most of your life, they do it well. But starting somewhere in your 50s and accelerating through your 60s and 70s, most people lose muscle mass, a process researchers call sarcopenia. Smaller sponges hold less water. Smaller, less active muscle tissue absorbs less glucose. Gerald had no idea this had been happening to him. So the same slice of bread that barely registered at 40 can produce a noticeably higher blood sugar spike at 65, even if nothing else about your diet changed at all. This was almost exactly what Gerald's doctor explained to him, drawing a second sketch on that same notepad this time. 2 sponges side by side, one visibly smaller than the other. Research on aging and insulin sensitivity backs this up directly in plain terms. How efficiently your body actually uses the insulin it produces to move that glucose into storage. And the muscle's response to insulin becomes measurably blunted with age, independent of weight. 2 people can weigh exactly the same, eat exactly the same dinner, and still produce very different glucose curves afterward because one of them has quietly kept more of that storage capacity than the other. It's not that older bodies are broken. It's that the storage system has quietly shrunk. And nobody warned you it was happening. Nobody had warned Gerald, either not until that second sketch on the notepad. This matters more than most people realize, because sarcopenia doesn't announce itself the way a heart attack or a stroke does. You don't feel your muscle mass declining. You feel its downstream effects: the fog, the fatigue, the numbers on a lab report years after the actual cause started. Here's the hopeful part, and I want you to sit with this one because it's genuinely encouraging. Muscle tissue is one of the most trainable systems in the human body, at any age. A sponge that's shrunk and stiffened from disuse isn't ruined, it softens and grows again the moment you start working it. Multiple clinical trials in adults over 60 have found that building muscle back through resistance training measurably improves insulin sensitivity in some studies, on par with what you'd expect from certain medications. This isn't a permanent condition. It's a system that responds to being used again starting within weeks. So let's get specific. 4 things quietly driving blood sugar upward after 60. Number 1. The muscle loss we just talked about, sarcopenia. It happens gradually and silently, often starting years before anyone notices, and it directly shrinks your body's glucose storage capacity. This is the quiet structural driver underneath almost everything else on this list, the one Gerald's own doctor pointed to first. Gerald's muscle mass hadn't dropped dramatically. It had dropped exactly the amount you'd expect for a man his age who'd stopped doing any strength work a decade earlier, enough to matter, not enough to notice in the mirror. Number 2. Sitting still after meals. When you eat and then sit at a desk, on a couch, in a car, that glucose surge has nowhere productive to go. Research on postprandial walking has found that even a short walk after eating substantially blunts the glucose spike that follows a meal, because contracting muscles pull glucose out of the bloodstream directly, independent of insulin. One controlled study found this effect starts within minutes and holds for up to 2 hours afterward. A sponge that just sits there untouched doesn't wring itself out. It stays full, saturated, unable to take in more. Movement is what wrings it out. Muscle contraction pulls glucose out of the tissue and clears room for the next round, independent of insulin entirely. Gerald's routine had an accidental version of the opposite. Lunch, then straight back to his desk. Dinner, then straight to the recliner. Twice a day, every day, for years, that sponge stayed full a little longer than it needed to, and his glucose had nowhere to go but up and slowly back down on its own. Number 3. And this is the one almost nobody has heard of, which is exactly why I want to slow down here. It's not just what you eat, it's the order you eat it in. Researchers at Weill Cornell ran a study where the same patients ate the exact same meal: chicken, vegetables, bread, and juice on 2 separate days. The only difference was sequence. One day, carbohydrates first. Another day, vegetables and protein first, carbohydrates last. Picture the 2 glucose curves side by side the way Gerald's doctor later drew them for him. The carbs first day produced a sharp, steep spike straight up. The vegetables and protein first day produced something closer to a gentle hill. The result, post-meal glucose, was roughly 30% lower on the day they simply changed the order of the exact same food. Same calories, same plate, just a different sequence. The mechanism is straightforward. Fiber and protein slow down how quickly your stomach empties into your small intestine, which slows how fast that glucose hits your bloodstream. A slower arrival gives that same sponge more time to actually absorb it, instead of a sudden flood arriving all at once and simply overflowing. This has been replicated in more than one study now, including one specifically in people with prediabetes, the exact gray zone Gerald was sitting in. Eating vegetables and protein before carbohydrates reduced the glucose spike by roughly 40% compared to eating carbs first. Even though every participant ate identical meals, Gerald had always eaten his bread first out of habit, the way most of us do: clear the roll, then get to the rest of the plate. It turns out that habit alone was working against him at every single meal, 3 times a day for decades, without a single calorie needing to change. Number 4. Inconsistent sleep and circadian disruption, a fancy way of saying your body's internal clock, the one that expects lights out and wake up around the same time each day, getting thrown off. It's something we've actually covered on this channel before, and it turns out it circles right back to blood sugar. Poor or irregular sleep has been linked in multiple studies to measurably reduced insulin sensitivity the very next day, even in people who aren't otherwise at risk. Your body's glucose handling isn't just about food and movement. It's tied to your internal clock as well. Gerald's sleep had drifted the way a lot of retirees' schedules do: later to bed, later up. No real pattern from one night to the next. Nothing that felt like a problem. Just enough irregularity to quietly work against him alongside everything else. Now here's the study that genuinely surprised the researchers who ran it, and it's the part most videos on this topic skip entirely. A meta-analysis of resistance training programs in older adults, people over 60, without diabetes, found measurable improvements in insulin sensitivity markers after as little as 12 weeks of consistent strength training. 12 weeks. Not years of gym membership. Not a dramatic transformation. 3 months of showing up. What surprised the researchers wasn't just that it worked, it was how much it worked. In people who weren't athletes, weren't young, and in many cases had never lifted a weight in their lives. The body's ability to rebuild that glucose storage capacity didn't require youth. It just required consistency. Let that sit for a second, because it reframes the entire conversation. This isn't a story about willpower or deprivation. It's a story about a handful of specific learnable inputs that your body responds to faster than most people assume. Gerald's doctor showed him the 12-week window on that same notepad, circled twice. That's an important correction, and it's good news. The goal was never accept that this happens with age. It was always, here's exactly what to do about it. So let's talk about what actually goes on your plate, in your day, and in your routine. Picture this: it's the same Tuesday it's always been. Same lunch, same plate. The only difference is you eat the salad first this time. You take a 10-minute walk around the block after, and twice this week, you've picked up a light set of dumbbells for 15 minutes. Nothing about your life needed to be rebuilt. 4 small habits layered onto the week you already have, the exact week Gerald ended up living, almost without noticing the shift. Number 1. Post-meal walking. 10 to 15 minutes, starting within 30 minutes of eating, is enough. It doesn't need to be brisk or difficult. Light to moderate is actually ideal, since it uses muscle contraction to clear glucose without competing with digestion. Research suggests the benefit plateaus around the 15 to 20-minute mark. So this isn't about pushing longer and longer walks, it's about consistency after the meals that need it most. This is one of the simplest, best supported tools in all of blood sugar research, and it costs nothing. Number 2. Food order. Vegetables and protein first. Carbohydrates last. Same meal, same portions, meaningfully lower spike. This alone in the Weil-Cornell research outperformed what many people expect from far more complicated diet changes. It's arguably the easiest change on this entire list, because it doesn't ask you to eat differently. Just in a different order, the exact swap Gerald made without even having to think about it after a few weeks. And here's something worth pausing on, because it connects these first two tools directly. Walking after a meal and eating in the right order aren't competing strategies, they stack. Do both at the same meal, and you're addressing the spike from two directions at once, before it even has the chance to climb as high. Number 3. Resistance training. Twice a week. This doesn't mean a gym membership or heavy barbells, bodyweight squats, resistance bands, light dumbbells. The research showing improved insulin sensitivity in older adults used exactly this kind of accessible strength work, not competitive lifting. The goal is rebuilding those glucose-storing sponges, not building a physique. 2 sessions a week, 15 to 20 minutes each, is where most of the studied benefit shows up. This isn't a demanding program, it's a modest, repeatable one. This was the piece Gerald almost skipped, assuming it wouldn't matter as much as the walking or the food order. It mattered just as much. Number 4. Consistent sleep and light exposure. The same circadian habits we've talked about before on this channel. Going to bed and waking at similar times, and getting natural light early in the day, supports the same internal rhythm that governs how well your body handles glucose overnight and the next morning. If you've already built some of those habits from our sleep episode, this is simply another reason to keep them. If you're on medication for blood sugar or heart health, please talk to your doctor before changing your routine. These habits work alongside good medical care, not instead of it. Especially if you're taking something like metformin or insulin. Gerald didn't overhaul his life a second time. He added a 10-minute walk after lunch, because that was the meal he was least likely to skip it for. He started eating his vegetables first, out of the same habit that used to have him reach for the bread. And on Tuesdays and Fridays before his shower, he did 15 minutes with a pair of light dumbbells his daughter had left behind years ago. 3 months later, his fasting glucose had come down. Not dramatically. Enough that his doctor's eyebrows went up this time, in the good way. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. Rising blood sugar after 60 isn't a verdict, and it isn't a mystery. It's a handful of specific fixable habits. If you only take 3 things from today, take these. Walk for 10 minutes after your biggest meal. Eat your vegetables and protein before your carbs, and pick up something heavier than a coffee cup twice a week. Those 3 alone are doing most of the work. The sleep piece just helps everything else land. None of it requires becoming a different person. It requires a 10-minute walk, a different order on your fork, and 2 short sessions with a lightweight. Exactly what Gerald was still doing 3 months later, without it feeling like a chore. If this helped make things clearer, hit subscribe, because there's one more piece of this puzzle we haven't covered yet, something about exactly when and how you eat protein throughout the day that changes almost everything we just talked about. Because it turns out Gerald's daughter had one more question for his doctor. Not about what he was eating, about when, and that's exactly where we're headed next.